It began with a silence that was heavier than any argument. The space they left behind wasn't just empty, it was a vacuum, pulling all the air and warmth from your life. But the real cold settled in when you started looking at the numbers. It wasn't just a breakup, it was a liquidation. You were left with the debts, the shared responsibilities that were suddenly yours alone, while they walked away toward a life that glittered with promise, a life you couldn't offer. The humiliation was a quiet, constant burn. It wasn't the anger of a fight, but the cold shame of being weighed and found wanting. Their choice was clear, the comfort of money over the history of you. Every night, you'd lie awake, not just from worry, but from replaying the conversations, seeing the moment their eyes shifted from looking at you to looking past you towards something bigger and shinier. Your days became a cycle of avoidance and anxiety. The mail was a source of dread, each envelope a potential new blow. The phone ringing would make your heart leap into your throat. You were living in a state of scarcity, not just of money, but of peace, of sleep, of self-worth. You felt profoundly alone, carrying a burden that was meant for two, a ghost in your own life, while theirs, from a distance, looked like a victory lap. Then, one night, exhausted and surrendered, you had a dream. It wasn't frantic or frightening. You were standing at the edge of a vast, calm ocean. The water wasn't coming to drown you. It was gently lapping at the shore, pulling back the sand, smoothing everything over. You could feel the immense, quiet power of it. There was no voice, no brand message, just a deep, unshakable feeling that washed over you as you woke. A cleansing was coming. It was a promise from somewhere deep within that this tide of debt, both financial and emotional, was about to turn. That dream didn't make the bills vanish overnight, but it did something more profound. It quieted the storm inside you. The constant buzzing panic softened into a low hum, and then into a deep silence. You started sleeping through the night. You began making calls to sort out the finances, not with a trembling voice, but with a calm resolve. The cleansing had begun, not with a flood, but with a quiet, steady current of peace that was all your own. Then you saw them. It wasn't online, it was real. Across a street you were walking down with a newfound lightness in your step. At first you only recognized the expensive silhouette, the tailored coat, the pristine shoes. But as you got closer, you saw the person inside the costume. Their face, which you remembered as a mask of confident ambition, was drawn and pale. There were dark, bruised-looking circles under their eyes that no concealer could hide. Their posture was rigid, their shoulders hunched forward as if bracing for a blow. They were on their phone, but not in the casual way people are. Their thumb wasn't scrolling, it was frozen. Their eyes were locked on the screen with a raw, desperate intensity, as if they were waiting for a verdict. Every few seconds, their jaw would clench. You saw it then with absolute clarity. The wealth they had run toward wasn't a source of freedom, it was a prison. It was a demanding, relentless master that was consuming them from the inside out. The glitter was just a thin layer of gold paint over something rotting. In that moment, you felt no anger, no satisfaction, only the quiet, liberating truth. The ocean from your dream had washed you clean, leaving you on solid ground, while they were being pulled under by an anchor of their own choosing. Look, let's talk about what happened next after you saw them on the street, because that moment of clarity was just the beginning of the end. The real test came a few weeks later. It started with a phone call from a number you didn't recognize. You answered, your voice steady, a calm you hadn't owned in years. And there it was, that voice, but different, thinner. The old confidence was gone, replaced by a brittle, forced casualness. They asked how you were. They said they were just thinking about you. The words were empty, just a flimsy bridge to what they really wanted. You didn't play along. You didn't offer them the comfort of small talk. You just listened, and the silence on your end of the line made them work harder. The facade cracked. They started talking about some bad luck, about partners who weren't reliable. The language was vague, but the picture was crystal clear. The glittering life had shattered. The money they ran to had run out, or it had turned on them, and now they were standing in the rubble. Then came the real reason for the call, wrapped in a pathetic attempt at nostalgia. Remember how we used to handle things together? We were always such a good team. It was a desperate grab for a past they had willingly burned to the ground. They weren't asking for you, they were asking for a bailout.
They saw you as a port in a storm they had created. And in that moment, you felt nothing. Not rage, not pity, not even a flicker of satisfaction. You just felt done. The debt had been paid. Not the financial one, that you were handling yourself, but the emotional one. You realized the cleansing from your dream wasn't about getting money back. It was about getting your peace back. You let them finish, and when they were done, met only by your silence, you said, "I have to go now." There was no malice in it.
It was simply a fact. You had somewhere to be, a life that was calm and stable and entirely your own. You hung up before they could say another word. You didn't block the number. You didn't have to. You knew they wouldn't call back. They had heard it in your voice. The door wasn't just closed, it had vanished, and you were finally, completely free. That phone call, the one where you hung up and felt the world settle into place, wasn't the end. It was just the final receipt for a transaction that had been completed long before. The real payment, the true balancing of the scales, happened in the quiet months leading up to it. This was the time of the harvest and the signs, a period where you witnessed, with a strange and sober clarity, the unmaking of their world and the remaking of your own. For you, the harvest began not with a sudden windfall, but with the return of small, forgotten joys. It was the taste of coffee in the morning, savored without the metallic tang of anxiety. It was sleeping through the night, a deep, dreamless rest that healed you more than any medicine could. Your energy, once a finite resource spent entirely on survival, began to replenish. And when it did, the world responded. An old colleague called with a freelance project, something small but meaningful. An idea you'd shelved years ago suddenly seemed not just possible, but necessary. These weren't miracles. They were the natural result of a field that was no longer being poisoned by stress and resentment. You were planting seeds of calm and focus, and what grew was stability. Your world, which had shrunk to the size of your worries, began to expand again. At the same time, the signs of their decay started to appear. They came not as a storm, but as a slow, persistent drizzle of bad news you never sought out. You'd hear their name in passing from a mutual acquaintance, followed by a hesitant pause and a comment like, "They seem stressed, very on edge." You saw them once more, this time getting into a car that was even more expensive than the last one. But the opulence was a joke. Their movements were jerky and frantic, their face pale under the city lights. They didn't look like they owned the car. They looked like they were fleeing in it. The most telling sign was the silence. The people who once flocked to them, drawn to the light of their success, were now quiet. There were no more casual mentions of their glamorous trips or business wins. The silence spoke of a different reality, one of closed doors, tense phone calls, and the cold, isolating pressure of keeping up appearances. Each sign was a quiet confirmation of a truth you already felt in your bones. A life built on a foundation of greed is a house of cards. It is fragile, empty, and destined to collapse under its own weight. You felt no pleasure in this, no sense of revenge. It was like watching a law of nature in motion, as inevitable and impersonal as gravity. They had chosen an anchor made of gold, and you were simply witnessing the predictable, tragic pull of it, dragging them under. That final quiet click as you ended the call was the truest sound you had heard in years. It wasn't a slam of a door in anger. It was the soft, satisfying sound of a heavy lock falling into place. For the first time, the silence that followed wasn't a void where they used to be. It was a space that was entirely, peacefully, yours. In the weeks that followed, you noticed how the world came back into focus. The colors of the city seemed sharper, the taste of your morning coffee richer. Your life wasn't suddenly glamorous or wealthy, but it was solid. It was built on the simple, unshakable foundation of your own resilience. You were paying your debts one by one, and with each payment you felt lighter. The true cleansing wasn't the erasure of the past, but the reclaiming of your present. Then came the day you knew was inevitable. They didn't call again. They showed up. You were leaving a small cafe, a place you went to read, and there they were, standing by your car. The sight of them didn't make your heart leap with fear anymore. It barely registered as a disruption. The expensive coat was still there, but it was rumpled, hanging off a frame that had lost its arrogant posture. Their face, which you had seen drawn and tired from across a street, now looked utterly defeated up close. The skin was sallow, the eyes hollowed out, darting around as if looking for an escape route. They had lost the one thing that had always defined them, their certainty. They tried to smile, but it was a grimace, a painful twitch of the muscles. They launched into a rambling story,
A series of unfortunate events, of untrustworthy people, of a world that had turned against them. The words were a torrent of self-pity and blame, but you heard what was underneath, the terrified confession of a gambler who had lost their final hand. The high life had demanded a higher price than they could pay, and it had consumed them. They weren't just broke, they were bankrupt in spirit. The glitter had been stripped away, revealing the cheap, decaying material beneath. Finally, the frantic monologue stopped, and they looked at you with an expression you had never seen before, raw, pleading desperation. "I messed up," they said, the words barely a whisper. "I know I did. But we were always so good together. I need a place to figure things out. Just for a little while." It was the ultimate ask.
They weren't just asking for money or a roof over their head. They were asking to come back into your life, to plug back into the stability and strength they had willingly discarded. They saw you not as a person they had loved, but as a resource they had left untapped. You looked at them, truly looked at them, and what you felt was a profound and distant sadness. It was the same feeling you might have watching a ship sink from a safe and distant shore. You took a breath, and the air you drew in was clean and free. "No," you said. The word was not sharp or cruel. It was a simple statement of fact, as calm and unchangeable as the tide. The person you built a life with is gone. You left them behind. And the person standing here now, my peace is not for sale. It's the only thing of value I have left, and I earned it. You didn't wait for a response. You walked past them, got into your car, and drove away. You didn't look in the rearview mirror. You already knew what you would see. A ghost, stranded on an island of their own making, watching the last boat sail away toward the horizon. And you kept driving, toward the calm, open water of your own life. The final chapter wasn't written in that rearview mirror. It was written in the quiet observations that followed, in the scattered reports you'd hear from people who still moved in those circles. These weren't dramatic tales of ruin. They were small, telling snapshots of a slow and steady collapse. They were the signs of the fall, and they painted a picture far more complete than any single confrontation ever could. You heard about the face first. Someone mentioned seeing them at a formal event, and the description was telling. They spoke of a weariness so deep it seemed to have settled into their bones. The smile, once a weapon of charm and confidence, was now a tight, strained exercise that didn't reach the eyes. Their eyes, people said, were the biggest change. They were constantly scanning the room, not with the relaxed gaze of a host, but with the hunted look of someone expecting a threat from any direction. The expensive suit and perfect hair were still there, but they were a costume worn by a ghost. The glow of success had been replaced by the pale, flat light of chronic stress. Then came the stories about their behavior. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a brittle, defensive nervousness. In meetings, they were said to be distracted, their attention constantly pulled back to the phone in their hand, which they guarded like a lifeline and a time bomb all at once. The easy laughter and commanding presence had evaporated. Now they were evasive, cutting conversation short, avoiding direct questions. They became a phantom in their own life, showing up to maintain appearances before retreating back into the shadows. They were no longer building an empire. They were managing a crisis, and the constant, frantic energy of it was visible to everyone. And finally, you heard about the environment they had chosen. The life that had once looked so vibrant and full of promise was in reality a sterile and cold prison. Their home, which they had once shown off as a symbol of their arrival, was described as a silent, lonely museum. There were no signs of life, of comfort, of real human connection, just expensive objects arranged in a perfect, soulless display. They surrounded themselves with wealth, but they were living in a state of profound scarcity. They had traded warmth for status, connection for assets, and peace for pressure. The high life wasn't a life at all. It was a high-stakes, high-stress performance with no audience, and it was draining them of everything they had. They hadn't just lost money, they had lost themselves. And so you arrive at the final truth, the one that comes long after the drama has faded and the dust has settled. This isn't about the satisfying crash of their downfall. It's about the quiet, unshakable peace of your own future. Years go by. The sharp edges of memory soften, and the story of your betrayal becomes less of a wound and more of a scar, a pale, silvery line that reminds you of a lesson learned, not a pain still felt. Your life didn't explode into wealth or fame.
Instead, it deepened. It found a quiet, steady rhythm. The peace you fought so hard to reclaim became the foundation for everything. You built a life not on grand ambitions, but on small, solid things. Work you found meaningful, friendships that were nourishing and real, and a home that was a sanctuary, not a stage. You learned that true abundance isn't about having more, it's about needing less. You had enough. You were enough. The constant, gawning hunger that drove them was a language you no longer understood. The final word about them came, as it always did, years later and secondhand. It wasn't a story of a spectacular public ruin, but something far quieter and more definitive. You heard they had left the city. There was no forwarding address, no new venture. They had simply vanished. The glittering world they had sacrificed everything for had forgotten them. They became a ghost, a name that prompted a vague, "Oh, I wonder whatever happened to them." Their final act wasn't a bang, it was a fade to black. And when you heard this news, you felt nothing. Not a flicker of triumph, not a whisper of pity. It was like reading a birth announcement from a town you left long ago, for people you no longer knew.
It had no relevance to the person you had become. In that quiet moment of absolute indifference, you understood the dream of the ocean completely. The cleansing wasn't about them being washed away. It was about you being returned to yourself. The final point is this: they didn't just lose the money. They lost the one thing money can never buy back: a soul. They traded their substance for a shadow, and when the lights went out, the shadow disappeared, leaving nothing behind. But you walked out of that fire with the only thing of true value: yourself, whole, calm, and finally, irrevocably, free. Your future wasn't an escape from the past. It was a world they could never touch, built on the solid ground of a peace they could never afford. The beginning was a quiet kind of suffocation. When they left, they didn't just take their belongings. They took the air out of your life, leaving you in a vacuum of shared debts and singular responsibility. They walked toward a future that shimmered with wealth, while you were left to sort through the wreckage. The humiliation was a cold, constant companion, the feeling of being weighed, measured, and discarded for something shinier. Every ringing phone, every official-looking envelope was a jolt of pure fear. You weren't just poor in money, you were bankrupt in peace. Then came the dream. You were standing at the edge of a vast, calm ocean. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. Its waves weren't crashing, they were rhythmically washing the shore clean, smoothing everything over. You woke up with a profound sense of stillness. The dream didn't pay the bills, but it silenced the panic. It was the beginning of a deep, internal cleansing. Weeks later you saw them, not on a screen, but in the flesh. They were stepping out of a car so expensive it looked like a spaceship, but the person inside was a prisoner. The tailored coat couldn't hide the rigid set of their shoulders, hunched as if waiting for a blow. Their face, once a mask of arrogant ambition, was pale and drawn. Under their eyes were dark, bruised hollows that spoke of sleepless nights and grinding anxiety. They were clutching their phone, not with ease, but with a white-knuckled desperation, their gaze locked on the screen as if awaiting a verdict. In that moment, you saw the truth with absolute clarity. The high life was a relentless master, and it was devouring them from the inside out. The glitter was just paint on a rotting frame. The inevitable call came on a Tuesday evening. The voice on the other end was thin, stripped of its old command. After a few pathetic attempts at small talk, the facade crumbled. They spoke of bad investments and unreliable partners. A storm of excuses that all meant one thing: the money was gone. Then came the plea, wrapped in flimsy nostalgia. "We were always such a good team. I just need a little help to get back on my feet." You listened to the entire performance, and when they finished, the silence on your end of the line was absolute. You felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, not even the faintest flicker of triumph. The emotional debt had been paid in full. The ocean had washed you clean. "No," you said. The word was not a weapon, it was a boundary. It was calm, quiet, and final. "I can't help you." You hung up the phone and felt the world settle. The door wasn't just closed, it had ceased to exist. You were standing up solid ground, breathing clean air. You were finally, completely free. And then the moment will come. It won't be a storm, it will be a quiet notification on your phone, a call from an unrecognized number, or a shadow standing on your street corner that slowly resolves into a face you once knew. They will make their move to return. Their message will be carefully crafted, an attempt to sound casual, filled with pathetic nostalgia about the good old days they single-handedly burned to the ground. They will talk about their bad luck, painting themselves as the victim of a world that was simply too cruel, never once acknowledging the choices they made. As you listen to their voice, thin and stripped of its former arrogance, or read their desperate words, you will feel nothing. Not the hot sting of anger, not the cold satisfaction of revenge, not even the dull ache of pity. You will feel a profound and complete stillness. In that quiet, you will realize that the person reaching out to you is a stranger. The connection you once had has been fully dissolved by time, pain, and your own hard-won healing.
you will understand that your peace is now a fortress, and they are standing at the gates, asking to be let back in, not out of love, but out of need. They don't want you. They want what you have built in their absence, stability. And so you will cut the tie. It won't be a dramatic confrontation. It will be a simple, quiet act of self-preservation. You will hang up the phone mid-sentence. You will delete the message without replying. You will turn and walk away without a word. It is not an act of cruelty, but one of finality. You are not slamming a door. You are acknowledging that the door, the house, and the entire world you shared with them no longer exists. I am free.